Welcome back to Trinidad and Tobago today on TTT. Good morning to you wherever you are. If you're streaming us live on YouTube or Facebook, thank you for being here. Well, 1 year after assuming office amid what many described as severe economic uncertainty, the current administration says it has been focused on one central mission: stabilizing the country, restoring confidence, and laying the groundwork for long-term recovery. From addressing inherited financial pressures and narrowing the fiscal deficit to renewed activity within the energy sector and a broader push toward economic diversification, the government has consistently maintained that its first year has been about rebuilding with purpose and creating a more sustainable path forward. Well, Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisesa has already signaled that 2026 must now be a year of rebuilding, recovery and delivery, with ministries being tasked to produce measurable economic outcomes and tangible benefits for citizens. But just how far has the country come in that process? And are the early signs pointing Trinidad and Tobago in the right direction? Well, I sat down with Economist Dr. Indera Sagewan to take a closer look at the government's first day of economic management and the road ahead. Let me start with this. Just how serious was the situation the government inherited when it came into office?
Well, I think the situation was quite dire. Okay, Virmala, I mean, if we look at this, the stats really bears it out, right? 2025, the previous administration would have ran a budget with a deficit of close to $10 billion, 5.5% of GDP. Our debt to GDP ratio was in the vicinity of about 84%. We had a foreign exchange crisis. Employment generation was at an all-time low. And the very Prime Minister himself at the time told us, with our dragon, our cuckoo cook, was that the terminology that he used, basically saying to us that, listen, if dragon does not dance, this country is in dire straits. And that is the context in which a new administration came into office in April of 2025. So I think there was a lot for them to try to analyze, to take stock of when they came into office, because was wanting to be on the outside and knowing intuitively that it was a bad situation you're going into. But obviously it's another story when you then get into office and you see these things. You know, people like myself, for example, we were long calling on the previous administration, outside of Dragon, what? What is the alternative? What are the alternative pathways to getting us back on a footing of growth? And I mean, I didn't even mention the fact that over the 10 years that the PNM governed the country, we were in negative growth for a 10-year period, with the exception of 1 year, 2022, as a consequence of the little positive blip that took place as a consequence of the Russian-Ukraine war. So that really is the context in which a new administration came into office.
And of course, they inherited hidden liabilities and debt obligations. So how significant was all of this being uncovered?
Well, I think they're still uncovering. It's, 1 year is not a long time. We've heard a lot of it. We've heard a lot about corruption, mismanagement, overspend. We, in multiple sectors, ranging from at the very basic in terms of CPEP and URP, moving straight on to the very top in terms of large contract awards, etc. But to me, the more concerning issue is the fact that so many expenditure was facilitated through borrowing, through simply deferral of payments. I mean, if we talk up to contractors, if you talk to the manufacturing sector, in terms of non-payment to contractors, in terms of non-payment of VAT to the manufacturing sector, that really stifles them. These things really paint the picture in terms of a lot of expenditure that took place without ensuring that there was the money in order to be able to repay it. And that is borne out by the fact that this government went out in the international market for a $1 billion bond most of that is simply for debt rescheduling, which is to repay debt. So there's very little money that is left out of that with 1 billion US dollars, which is approximately 7 billion TT dollars that the UNC government would have just secured, and that has gone simply to push the indebtedness into the future, not allowing it to have that money to be able to engage in important expenditure like reform of the health sector, reform of education, so this it's social sector, places that we really need money, diversification and growing the alternative sectors. That money is simply not available. And to a large extent, I would say that this administration has spent at least the first 6 months in crisis management, trying to get a handle on where things are financially, and then trying to see how best they could put the country on a footing of towards stability, even before we could talk about growth. I think that has been its focus, and that is why some of the measures, for example, in the budget, some people are not happy with because it's increased taxation. But the bottom line is, and I've said this repeatedly, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance don't have a money tree. And if you inherit a situation where the pattern of expenditure over income has been one that the former exceeds the latter over a 10-year period, then you have to make some very hard decisions if you are to ensure that the economy remains stable. Because of course, the Minister of Finance had the option. He could have come in and slashed the expenditure. He could have said, listen, we simply don't have the money, and he could move the expenditure from the 59, almost $60 billion that he presented in his budget to, let's say, in line with his proposed income flow, which is about 55 billion. That would have been taking out almost $5 billion of expenditure. Where would that have come from? What would have had to take the cut? Crime fighting, and we know where that is. We can afford that. Healthcare, education, social services. Where would the cut have come from? So that it has not been an easy task. I do not envy the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister, given the hand that he and the government as a whole was dealt with. So I would say crisis management almost on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-by-month basis, trying to make sure that there is the money to be allocated to the critical issues. And there are things that were identified in the budget, and we have not heard the rollout of the expenditure. And I think by and large, it's simply because the money is not there. So the intent is there, the willingness is there, but that the resources, the financial resources, is simply not there to roll it out in the kind of way that the government would have. And when I talk about the issue of stability, I think that when you compare this administration 1 year in office with the former administration 10 years in office, I think really a lot has been done in terms of stabilizing the short term. Now, your viewers will appreciate that we've said this over and over. This economy is dependent on the energy sector. The energy sector in its heyday, this would have been like 2014, 2015, contributed 60% to government's revenue. So 60% of the annual budget that the government would have to spend would have come from the energy sector. In the 2026 budget, only about 22% of that was projected to come from the energy sector. Because between 2014 and now, we have seen a continuous decline in the energy sector because of natural gas curtailment. Plants on the estate have moved from operating at 100% to operating down to 60%. We've seen plant closure, some methanol plants. We've seen I don't want to say mothballing, but certainly the decommissioning of LNG1. These are some major plants. We know what happened with Yara and what happened with Methanex. I mean, there are some serious issues that happen in terms of contraction of that energy sector. And the lifeblood of that sector is natural gas. And the PNM administration, when you ask the question, where is the gas going to come from? The only answer we got was from the Dragon. And this is why when the OFAC license was cancelled, that was such a blow to us. But there was no alternative being offered. The UNC government came into office, and immediately we heard of ExxonMobil coming in with a potential $22 billion in investment. That is in oil, not in gas. So they are currently just at the early stages of that. We are hopeful that if they do find oil, and the likelihood appears to be strong, then that could see our supply of oil, which today is about 50,000 barrels per day, as compared to over a couple hundred, barrels per day in its heyday, so that we could see a shore up potentially of that. But it is investment. So this money is being spent right now by ExxonMobil. So tick for government happened very quickly. Then we saw that the some of the gas sources started to come, small ones, but started to come on the market, which obviously shore up the supply of natural gas. Great things. But now we are hearing about the Manatee field that again is going to, by 2027, 2028, it's going to come on stream. That's going to bring gas into the system. That will, I think, take us in the vicinity of close to 3,000. The terminology slips me this minute, but insofar as to say, right now we are right now just over half of the supply of natural gas that we need, and that would probably take us to about 2/3. And then because of the decision that the Prime Minister made with respect to her relationship with the United States, which she came into a lot of very heavy criticism for, because of that relationship, Dragon is potentially dancing for us again. There's a strong, very strong likelihood, by all accounts from the experts in the industry that I have spoken to, that signal that Dragon will dance. So 2028, 2030 looks like a very good period for us for the inflow of natural gas that will shore up the short term. This government has also awarded, I think, 2 contracts to some Chinese investors for exploration of natural gas. And they have put out another bid round again. So the energy sector looks like a lot of effort has been put in there, very quick effort by this administration to once again revitalize the energy sector as we know it, based on oil and based on gas. And in the short run, that augurs very well for us. What we do with the money that we get from it, though, will really speak to how the extent to which the government understands that that is not a long-term solution for us. That is the short-term, keeping us afloat, keeping us going. And the real challenge is using those resources in a way to diversify the economy and ensure that we have sectors other than traditional energy being the sources from which we generate jobs, generate employment, generate revenues to government. Because I'm a broken record, I'm saying that the energy sector, even in its heyday, only employed 3% of the country's labor force. 3% out of 600,000 persons. That's just about 30,000 individuals. Successive governments over time, they've used that money in order to generate employment through a very large public service. The entire state enterprises network through works like programs such as OJT, CPEP, URP. That money has allowed that to happen, but it's not a sustainable model. And we have seen the insustainability of that model, especially over the last few years. So what we want is we want the investment to be put in place, and we want the signals to be spent that tourism, non-energy manufacturing, agro-processing, primary agriculture, those are the areas, AI, the new technologies of the world, where our young people will now be incentivized to go into. That's where we want the money to go into. We want reform of the education system in order to prepare our human capital for a new world, a world in which AI is key. And that is a very important element that we need to factor in as we look at how we position the country. Now, early on, the government did signal very strong that non-energy diversification was going to be a significant focus. of this administration. But this is not the first time we've heard that. We've heard it every time the energy sector declines. Governments get all excited about non-energy diversification. But once energy things start to happen, like right now, the war in between the US, Israel, and Iran has pushed the price of oil from it was hovering like around $64 per barrel before the war broke out, less than what we budgeted for, close to $75 per barrel. It reached over $100, $110 per barrel. It's now just under $100 per barrel, but all the experts are saying that they anticipate that certainly for the rest of this year, going into next year, that the price of oil is going to be relatively high. The price of gas, the price of petrochemicals follow the price of oil. So that what that means is that on the positive side, it means that we could benefit from getting more income from selling the same amount of oil and gas and petrochemicals. But on the downside, government could potentially, and I use my words very carefully, could potentially become complacent in terms of seeing, well, things are going great. We're seeing Dragon, Manatee, the Lauren, which is the other part of the Manatee project. And when you look at that in terms of the inflow of gas that will come through our system, it's a really an attractive amount. And therefore, we could get complacent and say, okay, things are great, everything's going to be okay. But the world is changing very, very rapidly. And the rate at which the world is changing signals to us that there are many challenges to economies that are dependent on fossil fuel energy.
Well, what you're seeing here is when I sat down with Economist Dr. Indera Sagewan last week, and she took a closer look at the government's first year of economic management and the road ahead. We take a break, and when we come back, that continues. Well, in the second part of our discussion, Economist Dr. Indera Sagewan weighs in further on the government's economic direction, the signs of progress already emerging, and the expectations for the months ahead.
I think there are the nuggets of it in play. What we need to see is that the movement from articulation to implementation is the key. So if I go back, for example, to the budget, the only budget that the government read, it spoke a lot about non-energy diversification. It set some very ambitious targets. So, for example, in terms of tourism, the budget spoke about $3 billion to target and to achieve a $3 billion investment in tourism over a 2-year period, where 1 year is now done. So I guess we will wait to hear where we stand with respect to achieving this objective, because there's 1 more year left for this $3 billion in investment. It also speaks to $9 billion in investment in the tourism sector over the next 5 years. So that is very, a very attractive target set. But it's easy to set targets. The other thing is rolling out in terms of implementation. With respect to the agriculture sector, the budget spoke to increasing the exports of agriculture and agro-processed goods from Trinidad and Tobago, increasing that by $1 billion over the 2026-27 period, and doubling that by 2028. Now, we can't just wish that into happening. We have to be putting in the mechanisms in place in order for that to happen. We need to be revamping and revitalizing our primary production in terms of agriculture, in terms of raw material production, ensuring that we are producing the volumes and at a scale in order to feed into agro-processing. We need to embrace and engage in new technologies, and the budget, in fact, did speak to about $800 million to be allocated in a targeted area of new agriculture, technology-based agriculture. I'm not sure where we are with respect to that. So I'm saying to you that certainly a lot has been articulated and put on stream. The revitalization plan, I refer to that as the hardware that is necessary for our long-term growth. Very, very noble and grand objectives. 129 projects, infrastructure projects spread throughout the main pockets of Trinidad and Tobago, and even within some of the rural areas. So for the first time, we are hearing of a plan that is taking the infrastructural development beyond just Port of Spain, beyond just those areas, but really spreading it through the country. That particular project is a 10-year project that proposes or targets the generation of between 50,000 to 72,000 jobs over that period. And if we can achieve just a percentage of that, Virmala, I think we would be really on our way to a good place. The Minister of Works, Minister Jillian John, put out, which she received rather, I think, close to 1,000 expressions of interest with respect to the revitalization plan. She had indicated that the boots would be on the ground before the end of 2026. They are at the examination stage, I guess. So again, an update on that would tell us where we are, because that kind of investment in the first instance on the ground flips economic activity. And when, as the economist talks about a multiplier, so if you put $1 million into the economy and the multiplier is 3, that generates $3 million in economic activity. So I know we're not going to get in, I'm not in a position to get into the process in terms of the recently announced $3.4 billion that was in projects announced by the HDC. Now, it supports the thing about stabilization, moving from crisis to stabilization. So we're mid-year in terms of that, and if this administration is able to successfully inject 3.4 billion TT dollars in construction, that is going to be a major fillip for short-term economic activity. The construction sector is what we tend to look at as an indicator. When we're looking at the health of an economy, one of the first things we look at is construction. What's happening with construction? Over the last 2 years, construction has been on the decline. Borrowing for investment has been on the decline. So that this kind of injection is what we need to happen. Now, the government did speak a lot about a lot of the investment for the revitalization plan coming from foreign direct investment or private sources. And that is very critical, and it is something that we have to be happy about. So government is not saying the state is going to go and enter into a lot of debt in order to engage in these investments, but we're looking for foreign investors to come in. We're looking for domestic private investors to take the lead on these things. So, and there's probably a lot more we could talk about, but I think that I have identified under this administration some of the critical things that has been done in order to put the country on a pathway of growth. But again, I underscore the fact that the proof is in the pudding, and it really comes down to the issue of implementation and achieving the targets that you have set. I can speak to the issue of the yachting industry, which has been a pet peeve of mine for a very, very long time. 15 forms, international yachts coming into this country has had to fill out 15 forms in order to come here. They have stopped coming because it's too bureaucratic. Within this year, this administration has changed that to that one seamless form. And that is amazing. This is something that the sector has been calling for. I have been calling for on behalf of the sector for well over 30 years. And nothing has been done. And it's really just very bureaucratic, just, stroke of a pen. And it has been done. That is a foreign exchange earning industry. The yachts that come here are coming from abroad. They bring in foreign exchange. They come in here potentially to stay for 6 months, live on their boats, do repairs on their boats, buy from our groceries and our restaurants and do our tours, etc. Spend money here, spend foreign exchange here. That's what we want. We want a lot more of that. The budget speaks to marinas and all kinds of things associated with the yachting industry. We await to see the rollout. So I will say the first year has been crisis management to stabilization. I think we still a ways from saying we're stable. We're still in a precarious place because the revenue inflows is at best meager, so that this administration does have some way before we can breathe. But Virmala, I look at the signs around me as an indicator of people's sense of confidence. If you go out in an evening, the restaurants are packed. You know, if you go around to the food courts, etc., people are buying, people are spending. And that is an indication that there is some amount of confidence that is taking place in the economy right now, that things are going to get better. I want to say, though, that 2026 is going to continue to be a year in which things are going to be tight. There is no magic bullet. Unfortunately, the government can't wave a magic wand and undo all that has been or that has happened. Some within our control, some outside of our control, to bring us to where we are at. Patience is required. Patience is required from all of us in order to be able to get to where we want to go. And I want to go on record to say that with respect to the 10% wage increase, the labor movement is no longer an actor on the side negotiating and fighting with government. They're part of the government. They're sitting around the table. And therefore, it must bring a different kind of approach to the issue of this 10%. And it must work with the government to ensure that the payment, which is already committed, is done in a way that does not erode the positive things that have been done so far, but supports it. So finding creative ways then to make those payments in a way that doesn't increase the debt burden of the state and by extension the debt burden of you and me, of the country, I think is something that I hope good sense will prevail on that.
Yeah. So finally, Dr. Sagewan, in your view, is the economy moving in the right direction?
I think it is. I think the one fly in the ointment continues to be crime. And I mean, yes, between yesterday and today, you know, we woke up to some stories that are very frightening, even more frightening than we have had to date. And that, I think, is something that really needs to be prioritized even more than it already has been. You know, the Prime Minister was very clear that her association with the United States since she came into office has been primarily about securing the country, securing our borders, securing us against the criminal element. But I feel that a lot more needs to be done because crime impacts everything. It impacts whether foreign investors will come here and put their money into the revitalization plan. It affects whether tourism will see the kind of growth that we want.
Thank you so much to Dr. Indera Sagewan for sitting down with Trinidad and Tobago today to help us take a closer look at the government's first year of economic management and, of course, the road ahead. We take a break and we come back with more on TNT Today. Redefining Normal is up next.